Hi everyone, my name's Amy. Today I'm super excited to share with you this coffee table that I've been working on for at least 6 months. On top it has two live edge slabs with this center section glued together into a pattern, and it also features this integrated drawer. So there were definitely some detours along the way that made it take so long, but it's finally done now, so let's get into it. I started with some poplar boards that some friends of mine were getting rid of. They all had at least a little bit of warp, so they needed to be planed and joined before I could really get started. For this table, I was pretty excited to try making a castle joint, so I glued several layers together to make the legs. To help with clearing out material to cut the actual castle, I started by drilling some holes. Here you can see me coming in from all four sides, so there's less chance for visible tear out. Setting up a stop on the drill press makes it really easy to breeze through all the legs. Next, I moved to the tensioning jig on my table saw, which I set by making test cuts on a piece of scrap wood. This is actually one of the first table saw jigs I ever made. It doesn't get a lot of use, but I'm really happy to have it when I need it. Here I'm just scoring the grain for the rest of the cut. I probably should have done this earlier, but this will at least help me avoid tear out for the rest of the cut. Next, I cut notches in the pieces that will form the rest of the table frame. I machined a piece of white plastic to the width of the frame pieces minus 2 saw kerfs. This gives me a really accurate and repeatable notch. The rest of the material can just be removed freehand. Using a thin saw blade, I then cut out the center section of one of the long frame pieces. This will serve as the front for the integrated drawer. The drawer itself is just a sheet of plywood glued to poplar boards that have rabbets running along the bottom edge. Next, I turned my attention back to the legs. I actually made this tapering jig specifically for this project, and now that I have it, I don't know how I got around so long without one. Using my laser cutter and mill, I whipped up a doweling jig for attaching the drawer supports to the rest of the frame. Somehow I lost the actual video of me assembling the frame, so you'll just have to trust me that it went smoothly. Here I'm attaching the drawer slides. As you can imagine, the frame itself is quite wiggly without the drawer in place, so it was really important to get the mounting position of the drawer slides right, on both the drawer and the frame. So I clamped everything in the closed position, marked the correct location for the drawer slides, and then screwed the hardware in place. Originally, I was planning to use part of this damaged headboard for the top of the table, but my friend gave me two poplar live edge slabs that just seemed perfect, aside from being too narrow to fit my existing frame. So as you'll see, I'm about to spend a lot of time gluing together a decorative chunk of wood to make the tabletop wider. Oh yeah, and this is Sylvester. He's a big distraction when I'm working in the shop. Here's one of the slabs, but first, how to make the tabletop wider. I went through my wood collection to see what I could piece together to create the extra width in the table, while also thinking about how I could combine those pieces into an interesting pattern. The problem was actually pretty constrained because I had a limited number of boards to choose from, but ultimately I settled on this design with a curly maple square in the center, maple and walnut chevrons going out from each side, and then lined with two strips of oak. I then did a final check to make sure that I could actually take the boards I had and assemble them into the shape I needed. I'll spare you much of the joining, planing, and table sawing, but there definitely was a lot of it. Here I'm cutting the maple into strips of decreasing width. I then alternate the maple with strips of walnut. Because of the 45-degree angle, I ended up gluing these boards up in 2 sets, and then gluing those 2 sub-assemblies together. I found that a triangle block with 2 clamps worked really well for clamping on the 45-degree. I then went back to the tapering jig to cut the slab into the 4 strips I needed for the final pattern. The maple is especially hard to cut, or maybe my blade is super dull, or probably both. Either way, I had to take multiple cuts, and I still ended up with burn marks that I had to remove before the final glue up. For this glue step, it was especially important that both pieces be perfectly aligned. I used some scraps of plastic from the laser cutter to distribute the clamping force, and also because the glue doesn't stick to the plastic. When I finally attached the 2 sides to the center square, I used some 80-20 rails to get everything flat. The newspaper is just to catch the glue squeeze out. In hindsight, it might have been better to make a whole jig that also allows me to apply clamping pressure from both ends, but this ended up working okay. A quick trim on the table saw smoothed out the last rough edges before I glued an oak strip to each side. At this point, there were some slight height differences, but with all the different grain directions, I chose to do slow passes in a thickness sander rather than going back to the planer. Okay, exciting moment. Here are all the pieces of the tabletop assembly. And if I move the center piece out of the way, you can see why I spent so much time making what is essentially just an elaborate filler. These 2 slabs alone are not quite wide enough to form the entire table surface. So what I've done is position their live edges so that I think they make a good outline perimeter. And the next thing I'm going to do is just trim the center section so that this centerpiece can sit centered relative to the frame. Before filling all the voids with epoxy, I blocked everything off with Gorilla Tape. This actually works remarkably well. This really isn't the right kind of epoxy for this kind of fill, so it does tend to leave lots of bubbles, but the heat gun gets most of them out. After this project, the card scraper is definitely one of my favorite tools. One final planing and joining step, and the 2 slabs are finally ready for glue up. It doesn't show in the video, but this part was super exciting for me. There was a tiny bit of bow, and I really wanted to minimize any offset in the final tabletop so I wouldn't have to do so much sanding. So I decided to use pins both for alignment and to help pull this offset flush. I knew going into this that this huge panel glue up was going to be really tricky for me. So I actually took the time to make some awesome homemade bar clamps designed by John Heinz of ibuildit.ca. I expected I would damage the edge of the slab when hammering it together, but it was really fast to fix with my homemade spoke shave that I also made just for this project. So really, this project took 6 months because I paused to make so many random little things in between. After I scraped the surface smooth, I found I didn't like the roughness from the pores in the oak and to a lesser degree from the walnut. So I decided to skim coat some epoxy to help fill the pores. This was actually the first of 2 coats since the first one soaked in so much. And this day here was easily one of the best days out of the whole project. I then scraped and sanded everything flat again to prepare for the final finish. I nearly forgot to put a finger groove in the bottom edge of the drawer. At the last minute, I also decided to trim these ends flush. With so much going on with the slab, I think the frame just looks better with simpler lines. For the finish, I chose boiled linseed oil because it's really easy to apply and also really easy to make repairs to later on. This table is going to get used every day, and I really don't want something that I'll be nervous to ding or scratch. So making things easy to repair is definitely a priority. To attach the slab to the frame, I made some simple L brackets from aluminum angle. And finally, we are in the home stretch. This handy little 90-degree driver is one of my favorite discoveries from this project. Because of the integrated drawer, the frame gets much of its rigidity from attaching to the slab. And as a final touch, some plastic feet.
Yay! Thank you all for watching. My channel literally just passed 10K subscribers as I was setting up for this shot, so thank you all for your support. If you enjoyed this one, please like and subscribe. Bye!